The air in the nation's capital was warm for mid-April. On the evening of April 12, 1945, in the midst of a global war, Vice President Harry S. Truman was presiding over the Senate. He decided to break from his duties and visit his friend and mentor, House Speaker Sam Rayburn. Upon arriving at Mr. Rayburn's office, he was immediately told to call the White House. Stephen Early, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's press secretary, was on the line with urgent, terse instructions. The vice president needed to come to the White House at once. Truman assumed he was being summoned for a routine meeting, perhaps to sign some papers. He got into his car and was driven the short distance from the Capitol to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Upon his arrival, he was ushered directly into the First Lady's study. Eleanor Roosevelt approached him, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and delivered the words that would irrevocably alter the course of his life and world history. "Harry," she said, "the president is dead." For a long moment, Truman was speechless. He finally found his words. "Is there anything I can do for you?" he asked the First Lady. Mrs. Roosevelt replied softly, "Is there anything we can do for you? For you are the one in trouble now." In that single, stark instant, the mantle of the presidency, the weight of a world at war, and the responsibility for a secret of unimaginable power fell upon the shoulders of a man who felt utterly unprepared. He told reporters soon after, "I felt like the moon, the stars, and all the planets had fallen on me." The following days were a whirlwind of frantic briefings and staggering revelations. During his mere 82 days as vice president, Truman had been deliberately kept out of the inner circle of the war's most sensitive matters. He had scarcely seen President Roosevelt and had received no briefing on the development of the atomic bomb or the escalating difficulties with Soviet Russia. His first major briefing as president came on April 25, 1945, from Secretary of War Henry Stimson and the head of the Manhattan Project, General Leslie Groves. Stimson handed him a lengthy document and gravely explained that the United States was on the verge of perfecting a new weapon of almost supernatural destructive force. It was an explosive great enough to destroy the whole world. Stimson expressed his own deep uncertainty, fearing that modern civilization might be completely destroyed by such a weapon. Truman would later confess in his memoirs that, listening to this briefing, he felt the same fear. This was his formal, terrifying introduction to the atomic bomb. He was now the ultimate authority over a project that had been years in the making, a scientific and industrial endeavor so secret that most of his own cabinet knew nothing of it. The Manhattan Project was not an abstract concept. It was a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar enterprise employing hundreds of thousands of people across the country, and it was hurtling toward a conclusion that would place a weapon of apocalyptic power in his hands alone. As President Truman settled into his new and crushing responsibilities, the wheels of war and science continued to turn. In the Pacific, the fight against Japan was reaching a brutal and bloody crescendo. Recent battles on Iwo Jima and Okinawa had been extraordinarily costly in American lives, and intelligence suggested that an invasion of the Japanese home islands would be met with fanatical resistance. The American public was weary of war, and Japan was a hated enemy. The prevailing military and political strategy involved bringing the war to a swift end to avoid a protracted invasion that could cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties. Meanwhile, the scientific work on the bomb reached its own climax. On July 16, 1945, in the desert of New Mexico, the first atomic device was detonated in the test code named Trinity. The flash of light illuminated the distant mountains, and the heat was felt for miles. The towering mushroom cloud was a sight from a new, terrifying epoch. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director of the Los Alamos Laboratory, would later recall a line from Hindu scripture flashing through his mind, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." A coded message was swiftly sent to President Truman, who was attending the Potsdam Conference with Allied leaders. "Baby is born." The atomic age was no longer theoretical, it was a concrete, earth-shattering reality. It was in this context of triumphant scientific achievement and profound dread that Truman faced his first monumental decision. He was now forced to confront the practical question of whether to use this new weapon against Japan. The historical record shows that Truman's authorization was not a single, explicit written order. The closest thing to such a document is a handwritten note he penned to Secretary Stimson on July 31, 1945, authorizing the release of a public statement about the use of the bomb. On this note, Truman wrote the decisive words, "Release when ready." This served as the final go-ahead. Earlier, on July 25, he had written in his diary, reflecting on the bomb's power, and noted the plan was to use it against military targets and not women and children. This distinction would soon become blurred in the devastating reality of atomic warfare. The formal strike order was drafted by General Groves on July 24 and approved by Stimson and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall the following day. It is not entirely clear that Truman ever saw this specific order before it was issued. The order stated that the first special bomb was to be dropped as soon as weather will permit visual bombing after about August 3, 1945 on one of the targets, Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, and Nagasaki. Critically, it added, additional bombs will be delivered on the above targets as soon as made ready by the project staff. This language created a powerful momentum, establishing a pipeline for atomic destruction that, after the first bomb, was designed to continue with minimal political interference. The first atomic bombing mission, targeting the city of Hiroshima, was delayed by cloud cover until the morning of August 6, 1945. When the Enola Gay released the little boy bomb, the world changed in an instant. The city below was engulfed in a searing fireball that generated temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. The resulting blast wave obliterated nearly everything within a mile of the hypocenter. Truman, who was aboard the USS Augusta returning from Europe, was informed of the successful mission. He was initially overjoyed, announcing to the ship's crew, "This is the greatest thing in history." He then read from a pre-written statement to the reporters on board, a statement he had no hand in drafting, which identified Hiroshima as an important Japanese army base and threatened that if Japan did not surrender, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. The official U.S. report from the Army Air Forces on Tinian Island, filed on August 8, made a conservative estimate that around 100,000 people had been killed. The image of Hiroshima that Truman and his advisors had in their minds began to shift dramatically on August 8. It was on that morning that Truman received a full briefing from Stimson. The press corps was present, and for the first time, they saw the now iconic aerial photo of Hiroshima, the smoke having finally cleared enough to reveal a city reduced to a scorched, flat ruin. This visual evidence arrived concurrent with the first Japanese reports describing widespread destruction and casualties in the hundreds of thousands. Stimson wrote in his diary afterwards that Truman now felt the terrible responsibility that such destruction placed upon us here and himself. The abstract military target was now viscerally understood as a city filled with people, including, as Truman would later note, all those kids. Even as this new understanding was dawning in Washington, the machinery for a second atomic strike was already in motion, driven by the existing orders and the relentless pace of the military operation. Unbeknownst to the president, the mission had been accelerated. The weather forecast for the original target date of August 10 was unfavorable, so the authorities on Tinian moved the schedule up by a day. The second bomb, Fat Man, was assembled and loaded onto a B-29 named boxcar. This mission was plagued by problems, both technical and human, but it ultimately succeeded in dropping its payload on the city of Nagasaki on the morning of August 9. There is no record of Truman being alerted that this second mission was imminent, unlike the first. It appears he learned of the bombing of Nagasaki after the fact. The strike order had given the military the authority to drop bombs as soon as made ready, and it is not clear that Truman was fully aware of how little control political leaders had over the timing of subsequent bombs once the first was used. The Nagasaki bombing was also overshadowed by another earth-shattering event. During the night of August 8, the Soviet Union had declared war on Japan and launched a massive invasion of Manchuria. The geopolitical landscape was shifting at a dizzying speed. The morning of August 10, 1945, marked the true turning point, the moment when Harry Truman seized definitive control of the atomic age. Overnight, the Japanese government had sent an offer of surrender, accepting the terms of the Potsdam Declaration but with one condition, that the said declaration does not comprise any demand which prejudices the prerogatives of His Majesty as a sovereign ruler. This provoked intense debate within Truman's cabinet. At some point that same day, General Groves hand-delivered a momentous memo to General Marshall. It was a progress report on the next atomic bomb, stating that the third bomb, another plutonium implosion device, was ahead of schedule and should be ready for delivery on the first suitable weather after 17 or August 18. At the bottom of this memo, General Marshall wrote a line in his own handwriting, followed by his signature, that would change the chain of command forever. It read, "It is not to be released over Japan without express authority from the President." Later that afternoon, Truman held a meeting with his full cabinet. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal recorded in his diary that Truman, after rejecting a proposal for a full armistice, informed the group that there would be no further dropping of atomic bombs. Another cabinet member, Secretary of Commerce Henry Wallace, provided an even more vivid account. He wrote that Truman explained his decision by saying, He had given orders to stop atomic bombing. He said the thought of wiping out another 100,000 people was too horrible. He didn't like the idea of killing, as he said, all those kids. The precise sequence of these events is unclear, but their meaning is not. Whether it was upon receiving the news of the next bomb's imminent readiness, or from his own revulsion at the scale of the destruction, Truman actively intervened. He countermanded the existing military orders and placed the power of the atomic arsenal directly and exclusively under his own authority. The era of presidential non-interference was over. From that day forward, no atomic bomb would be used without the express command of the President of the United States. In the decades that followed, Truman always insisted that he never lost any sleep over his decision to use the atomic bombs, maintaining that it ended the war and saved countless American and Japanese lives that would have been lost in a full-scale invasion. The debate over the necessity and morality of the bombings began almost immediately and continues to this day, a subject of what historian John Dower has termed the triumphal versus the tragic narratives. But often lost in that heated debate is the critical story of what happened in the 3 days following the first atomic explosion in combat. In just 72 hours, Harry Truman underwent a rapid and profound education. He transitioned from a new president unaware of the very existence of the Manhattan Project, to a commander-in-chief authorizing the use of a terrifying new weapon, to a world leader grappling with the horrifying reality of what he had unleashed, and finally, to the man who consciously and deliberately established a crucial precedent of civilian control over nuclear weapons. His journey from April 12 to August 10, 1945, represents one of the most compressed and consequential political transformations in modern history. He did not start the atomic age, but in those crucial 3 days in August, he took decisive action to control it, setting a vital, if fragile, taboo that has helped prevent the use of nuclear weapons in war for the 8 decades since. The story is not just one of destruction, but also of a president learning, under immense pressure, how to wield the most destructive force ever created, and in doing so, defining the rules of the new age for all his successors.